The morning light filters through my bedroom window, casting shadows across the worn floorboards, and I sit on the edge of my bed holding the navy dress between trembling fingers. The fabric soft from years of washing but still holding its shape. Still decent enough for Sunday service, I tell myself, though the seams have been let out twice and the hem taken up once when I lost weight that summer after Robert died 3 years ago. Now 3 years since I've worn anything new except the sensible shoes I bought at the discount store when my old ones finally gave up their so Leslie slipped the dress over my head, feeling the familiar comfort of cotton against my skin, and check myself in the mirror that hangs crooked on the wall. The woman looking back has gray threading through brown hair that I've learned to twist into a neat bun, and lines around green eyes that Robert used to say sparkled like creek water in sunlight. But those eyes don't sparkle much anymore, they just look tired. From late nights at the sewing machine, tired from taking on extra alterations for Mrs. Peterson down the street, tired from counting pennies and cutting coupons and pretending everything is fine when everything is anything but Finnith church bells start their Sunday mornings long, and I grab my worn leather purse, checking inside for the $5 bill I'll put in the collection plate, even though I could use it for groceries. But God knows I need His grace more than I need another can of soup, and I lock the front door of the small house that still smells like Robert's cologne sometimes when the wind blows just right through the rooms we shared for 28 years. Before his heart decided it had carried enough sorrow, walking the 6 blocks to Grace Community Church, my sensible shoes make soft sounds on the sidewalk, and I nod to neighbors tending their Sunday gardens. Mrs. Rodriguez waves from her porch, where she's watering petunias and coffee cans, and Mr. Jackson tips his hat as he loads his grandchildren into a minivan that's seen better days, but still runs like the faith that keeps this neighborhood stitched together with hope and stubbornness. Church parking lot is filling up with cars that range from rust buckets like the one I sold last month to gleaming SUVs that cost more than I made in 2 years of hemming wedding gowns and taking in alterations, and they're pulling into a space near the front steps is a silver Lexus that makes my chest tighten because I know that car, I know who drives it, and I know what seeing it means for my heart that's already tender this morning. Chloe steps out of the passenger side, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably costs more than my monthly grocery budget, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that catch the morning sun, and diamond earrings that flash when she turns her head to laugh at something her husband Greg says as he locks the car. She looks like she stepped out of a magazine, like the kind of woman I always dreamed she'd become, but not like this, not at this cost, not with this distance between us that feels wider than the miles between her new house in the wealthy part of town and my little rental on the struggling side-ish. Doesn't see me at first as I make my way up the church steps behind the elderly couple who always arrive exactly 15 minutes early, and I'm grateful for that small mercy because I need a moment to steel myself for whatever version of my daughter I'll encounter today, the one who calls twice a month with updates about her new life, or the one who looks through me like I'm furniture in a room she's already redecorated. Pastor Renee stands at the church entrance, greeting everyone with her warm smile and firm handshake that makes you feel like you matter, like your presence here is a gift she's been waiting to receive. She's known me since before Chloe was born, back when Robert and I were young and foolish enough to think love could solve any problem, back when we believed hard work and faith would be enough to build the life we wanted. Martha, she says when I reach her, you look lovely this morning, and her eyes are kind. But I catch the way they linger on my dress, the same dress I've worn to church for the past year and a half since I gave away most of my good clothes to the charity drive, telling everyone I was cleaning out my closet when really I was making room in my life for sacrifice, making space for love that costs everything. Thank her and move into the sanctuary where the familiar smell of lemon pledge and old hymnals wraps around me like Robert's arms used to on Sunday mornings when we'd sit in the third pew from the back and listen to Pastor Renee's father deliver sermons that made us believe we could weather any storm together. I take my usual seat now alone, but for Ruby Miller, who slides in beside me with her own worn purse. And knowing Smiley, Ruby's been my closest friend since Robert's funeral, when she brought casseroles every day for a week and stayed to do dishes while I cried oh for the kitchen sink. She knows about the sleepless nights and the empty bank account and the way I sometimes talk to Robert's picture when the silence gets too heavy. But even Ruby doesn't know everything, doesn't know the full price I paid for Chloe's happiness, doesn't know how many times I've counted the cost and decided it was worth it. Organist begins the opening hymn and voices rise around me in harmonies that remind me why I come here every Sunday, not just for God but for this feeling of belonging to something larger than my small troubles, larger than the knot in my stomach, when I see Chloe walking down the aisle toward the front pews, where the Hayes family sits like they own the building, like they've forgotten what it means to struggle for rent money. She looks beautiful gliding between the wooden benches in her expensive dress with her expensive husband, who treats her like the princess she always believed she was meant to be. And I should be happy. I should be grateful that my daughter found love and security, that she'll never know what it means to choose between heating oil and health insurance, never know what it means to sell your wedding ring to pay for someone else's dreams. But when she reaches the front pew, she turns to scan the congregation like she's taking inventory of who matters enough to acknowledge, and her eyes find mine for just a moment, long enough for me to raise my hand in a small wave, long enough for her to notice what I'm wearing, long enough for something to flicker across her face that might be embarrassment or might be pity. The sermon begins and Pastor Renee talks about hidden treasures, about the value of things that can't be measured in dollars or displayed in shop windows, and I try to focus on her words, try to let them wash over the ache in my chest, but I keep thinking about the ledger hidden in my bedroom dresser, the one with numbers that tell the story of how much love costs, when it's the kind that empties your pockets and fills your heart. After the service, as people gather in small groups to share news and plan potluck dinners, I make my way toward the exit, hoping to slip away before anyone notices, but Chloe's voice carries across the sanctuary, bright and cheerful and cutting. Go, my goodness, she's saying to a cluster of women that includes Lena Carter, her childhood friend who married money young and wears it like armor. Mom still wearing that same dress. I swear she's had it since I was in high school. It's so vintage, it's practically historic. Both women laugh, the polite kind of laughter that people use when they don't know whether to be amused or uncomfortable. And I feel heat rise in my cheeks, not from anger but from something deeper than that, something that tastes like pennies and regret, and the memory of standing in my empty closet 3 months ago deciding which dresses to donate so Chloe wouldn't see how little I had left. Pastor Renee moves closer to the group, her face carefully neutral but her eyes sharp in the way they get when she's about to deliver a truth nobody wants to hear. And I know I should leave now, should walk away before this moment gets worse, but my feet won't move and my heart won't stop racing, and Ruby's hand finds mine, squeezing tight like she's trying to hold me together. Well, Lena says with the kind of smile that cuts like a knife, at least she's consistent. Some people never change their style, do they? And the way she looks at me makes it clear that consistency isn't what she means. She means outdated, means less than, means other. Chloe laughs again, softer this time, but the damage is done. And she catches sight of me standing frozen near the back of the sanctuary, and for just a second her face changes, like she's remembering who I am, like she's remembering that the woman in the vintage dress is her mother, the one who raised her alone after Robert died, the one who worked double shifts to pay for her college, the one who believes love means sacrifice, even when sacrifice means standing in church wearing the same dress because all the others are gone. Manage a smile, because that's what mothers do. We smile when our hearts are breaking, we nod when we want to scream, we pretend everything is fine when everything is falling apart. And I excuse myself with a whispered word to Ruby, who tries to follow, but I shake my head. Because some humiliations are meant to be private, some pain is too tender for witness. Outside, the morning air feels cool against my burning cheeks, and I walk to the small garden behind the church where Robert and I used to sit after services when Chloe was little, when she'd run between the roses while we planned our week and dreamed about her future, never imagining that future would include moments like this, never imagining that love could feel like standing in a dress that represents everything I've given and everything I've lost. Ruby finds me there 10 minutes later, sitting on the wooden bench that needs painting, holding my purse in my lap like it contains all my secrets, and maybe it does. Maybe the $5 I didn't put in the collection plate is all I have left of my independence, all I have left to call my own. Martha, honey, she says, settling beside me with the careful movements of a woman who's lived through her own sorrows, who's learned that some days the only victory is making it to bedtime with your dignity intact. She didn't mean it the way it sounded, but we both know she did mean it exactly the way it sounded, and we both know that intentions don't soften the sting of words that cut deep, don't heal the wound of being seen as less than by the daughter who means more than everything, who cost more than I'll ever be able to afford, and who doesn't know that the dress she mocked is the same dress I wore to sell her father's tools, the same dress I wore to the pawn shop, the same dress that watched me give away piece by piece everything that mattered so she could have her fairy tale wedding. Tell Ruby I'm fine, because That's what we do in small towns. We're fine even when we're drowning, we're blessed even when we're broken, and I gather my worn purse and my wounded pride and I walk home to the empty house, where I'll sit at the kitchen table with the ledger that tells the truth about love and sacrifice and the price of a daughter's happiness. The afternoon stretches ahead of me quiet as a held breath, and I know that tonight I'll take out that ledger again. I'll run my fingers over the numbers that represent Robert's tools and our car, and the small savings account we thought would carry us through old age together. I'll remember every dollar that went to florists and caterers, and the Grand Plaza Hotel where my daughter danced at her wedding in a dress that cost more than I spend on groceries in 3 months. But for now I sit in the silence of my living room where Robert's chair still holds the shape of his body, where Chloe's high school pictures still line the mantel, and where the truth waits, patient as winter, for someone brave enough to speak it aloud, someone strong enough to admit that love sometimes looks like an old dress worn thin, with washing worn soft, with sacrifice worn proud, with the knowledge that some things matter more than looking perfect in the eyes of people who've forgotten what perfect really costs. The afternoon light slants through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor that Robert installed himself the summer before Chloe started high school, back when we still believed we had time to fix everything that needed fixing in this house, back when we thought love and elbow grease could make up for what money couldn't buy. And I sit at the small round table where we shared 20-1 years of Sunday dinners, counting every blessing and every bill. My hands shake as I open the old composition book with its black and white marbled cover, the same kind Chloe used for school reports when she was 10, and believed her mother knew everything worth knowing, believed I could solve any problem with a hug and a homemade cookie, and maybe I could then. Maybe love was simpler when it meant bandaging scraped knees and reading bedtime stories instead of emptying bank accounts and selling memories to pay for dreams. The pages crackle as I turn them, each line written in my careful handwriting, the kind the nuns taught me in Catholic school when penmanship mattered, when taking time to make letters beautiful was considered a virtue. And here on these yellowed pages is the arithmetic of sacrifice, the mathematics of a mother's love calculated in dollars and cents that never seemed to add up to in Robert's workshop. Sold March 15, $22,000. The entry reads in blue ink that's faded to gray like his eyes in the hospital bed when I promised him I'd take care of our girl no matter what it cost, no matter what I had to give up. And beside that number I've written in parentheses Chloe's dress deposit, because that's what it was really for, not groceries or house repairs or the dental work I've been putting off for 2 years, but for ivory silk and French lace. And the dream of our daughter walking down an aisle looking like the princess he always said she was. Car went next, my little Honda with 190,000 miles and a radio that only picked up the gospel station, but it ran faithful as prayer. For 12 years never left me stranded, never asked for more than oil changes and new tires, and the man at the used car lot gave me $4,000 cash money that felt heavy in my purse like silver coins, judging me for what I was about to do. March 22, catering deposit for $1,000, and underneath that in smaller letters, because shame makes handwriting shrink, I've noted no car payment needed anymore. Walk everywhere now, and it's true, I do walk everywhere now. To the grocery store 6 blocks away, to the church 8 blocks in the other direction, to Mrs. Peterson's house when she needs alterations done on her Sunday why dresses. And I tell people it's good exercise, tell them I'm getting my steps in, like the young people say with their fitness trackers and their yoga classes. But the truth written in this ledger, in numbers that don't lie, is that I sold my independence for my daughter's happiness, sold my freedom to move through the world on my own terms, so she could have centerpieces made of white roses and baby's breath, so she could have a photographer who cost more than I spend on utilities in 6 months, so she could have a reception at the Grand Plaza Hotel, where I once dreamed of hosting my own 25th wedding anniversary before Robert's heart decided 22 years was enough. Me wedding ring went last, and that entry is the hardest to read. April 2nd, wedding bands, white gold with small diamonds, $750, and beside it in handwriting that barely looks like mine because my hand was shaking so hard I could barely hold the pen. Final payment, flowers and music, because those were the last 2 things left on Chloe's list, the last 2 requirements for her perfect. I remember standing in the pawn shop holding the rings that Robert slipped on my finger in this very kitchen the morning we decided we couldn't wait for a big wedding, couldn't wait for anything, because we were young and foolish and believed love was all we needed. And the man behind the counter barely looked at them, just weighed them like they were scrap metal, like they weren't Symbols of promises kept through midnight fevers and job losses, and the long slow dying of dreams. Do you want the ticket? He asked, meaning, did I want the option to buy them back within 30 days? And I almost laughed, almost cried, almost asked him if he thought miracles happened in 30-day cycles, if he thought money grew on trees in the backyard of broken down houses, where widows count pennies and pray for grace. But instead I said no, just the cash please, because hope was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when Chloe needed flowers that matched her vision of perfect kitchen door opens, without a knock, because Ruby has that privilege earned through years of friendship. Forged in the fire of grief, and she takes one look at me sitting here with the ledger spread open like a confession, and her face goes soft the way it does when she's about to say something I don't want to hear, something true and necessary. And painful. Marta honey, she says, settling into Robert's chair at the table, the one I can't bring myself to move even though it's been empty for 3 years, even though sometimes I set a place for him out of habit, out of hope, out of the stubborn belief that love doesn't die just because hearts stop beating. You can't keep carrying this alone bit. That's where she's wrong, because carrying it alone is exactly what mothers do. We carry the weight of our children's dreams on our backs like Atlas holding up the sky. We carry their disappointments in our hearts like stones. We carry their futures in our prayers like promises we may never be able to keep, and we do it alone because that's what love looks like when it wears an apron and counts pennies and smiles when it wants to scream. Sees the numbers spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene, like proof of something that should be illegal, the systematic dismantling of a life to pay for someone else's happiness. And her eyes fill with tears that she won't let fall, because Ruby doesn't cry. She gets angry, she gets righteously indignant, she gets ready to fight battles. I don't have the strength to wage a $29,000, she whispers, reading the total at the bottom of the page, the sum of everything I owned. Everything Robert and I built together in 28 years of marriage, reduced to a number that barely covers one day of my daughter's joy, one perfect day that I'll never forget because it cost me everything I had left of yesterday. It's not about the money, I tell her, because it isn't really. It's about the fact that Chloe doesn't know what it cost, doesn't know that her fairy tale wedding was built on the bones of my history, doesn't know that every time she talks about her perfect day, she's talking about the day I gave up my past to buy her future. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around my loneliness, is that she wouldn't care if she knew. Ruby reaches across the table and covers my hand with hers, and her skin is warm and soft from years of working in church kitchens and volunteer organizations, from years of caring for people who needed caring for. And she says the thing I've been afraid to hear, afraid to even think, in the dark hours when sleep won't come and regret tastes like copper pennies in my mouth. She needs to know, Martha, she needs to understand what you sacrificed for her happiness, but understanding requires wisdom, and wisdom requires suffering. And I've spent my life trying to protect Chloe from both, trying to make sure he never knows what it feels like to choose between wants and needs, never knows what it feels like to love someone more than you love yourself, never knows what it feels like to watch your dreams dissolve like sugar in rain while you smile and pretend it doesn't matter. It's her happiness that matters. I say the words I've said so many times, they feel like a prayer, like a mantra, like a lie I tell myself to make the emptiness bearable. And Ruby shakes her head with the frustration of someone who's watched her best friend disappear piece by piece, someone who's seen love turn into martyrdom, turn into the kind of sacrifice that leaves nothing behind but resentment. Dressed up as virtue, if you won't say something, she warns, and her voice carries the weight of 20 years of friendship, the authority of someone who's earned the right to speak truth even when truth hurts. Someone else might, and there's something in the way she says it that makes me look up from the ledger, makes me see the determination in her eyes, the kind of resolve that comes from watching someone you care about suffer in silence for too long. What do you mean, I ask, though part of me already knows, already understands that secrets have a way of revealing themselves, that truth is like water finding the smallest crack and rushing through until everything breaks open, until everything drowns in the flood of what was hidden. People talk, Martha, people notice things, and Ruby's voice is gentle now, gentle the way she gets when she's delivering news that's going to hurt, when she's about to tell me something that will change everything. Again, people see you walking everywhere now. They remember you used to drive to church, they wonder why you don't wear your wedding ring anymore. They notice you buying less at the grocery store, wearing the same dress every Sunday. Me chest tightens because I know she's right. Know that in a small town like ours, privacy is a luxury nobody can afford. Know that someone somewhere has been adding up the pieces of my dismantled life and coming up with answers I'm not ready to give. And the worst part is that Chloe will find out eventually. will learn what I sacrifice not from me in a moment of love and explanation but from someone else in a moment of gossip and judgment. Ledger sits between us like a bridge between past and future, between the woman I was when Robert was alive and I believed we had enough time to build something lasting, and the woman I've become, empty-handed and empty-hearted but rich in the currency of sacrifice, rich in the knowledge that love sometimes costs everything you have and then asks for more. Ruby stands to make tea the way she always does when conversations get too heavy, when emotions threaten to spill over like water from to full cup, and I listen to her moving around my kitchen, opening cabinets she knows by heart, finding the good china we only use for special occasions. Though what makes this occasion special is the breaking open of secrets, the laying bare of truth that's been hidden too long. When she sets the delicate cup in front of me, steam rising like incense, like prayers I haven't had the courage to pray, I see myself reflected in the amber liquid. See a woman who's forgotten how to want anything for herself, a woman who's forgotten that love shouldn't require the complete erasure of the lover. And I know Ruby's right. No, that silence isn't protecting anyone anymore, it's just prolonging the inevitable. But knowing something and doing something about it are different kinds of courage, and I sit in my kitchen surrounded by the evidence of my sacrifice, watching the light fade outside my window and wondering if love that costs everything is really love at all, or if it's something else, something desperate and hungry and ultimately destructive, dressed up in the vocabulary of virtue. Ledger closes with a soft sound, like a sigh, like a door shutting on possibilities I'll never pursue, and Ruby sits across from me, patient as stone, patient as the women who've been waiting for justice since the world began. And I know she'll wait as long as it takes for me to find the courage to speak the truth that's been growing in my chest like a tumor, like a prayer, like a song I've forgotten how to sing. Sunday morning arrives again, the way it always does, indifferent to my sleepless night, indifferent to the conversation with Ruby that's been echoing in my head for 6 days, like a song stuck on repeat, like a warning I can't unhear. And I dress in the same navy dress because it's the only church dress I have left, because everything else went to the charity drive when I needed to make room for sacrifice, needed to make space for the kind of love that empties closets and bank accounts and leaves you standing in front of mirrors wondering who you've become. Walk to church feels longer this morning, my sensible shoes marking time against pavement, still damp from last night's rain, and I wonder if Chloe will be there again, if she'll sit in the fro and pew with her expensive husband and her expensive clothes and her expensive ignorance about what her happiness cost. And the thought makes my stomach clench like a fist, like a prayer I don't know how to pray. Grace Community Church looks the same as always, red brick and white trim, and the bell tower that's needed painting for 5 years, but somehow still looks dignified in the morning light, still looks like the kind of place where broken people can come to be whole, where sinners can come to be saints, where mothers can come to remember that love isn't supposed to hurt this much, isn't supposed to leave you feeling empty as a dried up well. Pastor Renee greets me at the door with her usual warmth, but there's something different in her eyes today, something that looks like knowledge, like understanding, like she's been talking to Ruby or to God or to her own conscience about secrets that fester in small congregations, like infections that need lancing. And I wonder what she knows, what she's guessing, what she plans to do about it. Inside the sanctuary, I take my usual place beside Ruby, who squeezes my hand in greeting and whispers that Chloe's already here, already sitting in the front row with Greg, and I follow her gaze to see my daughter's blonde head bent over her phone, probably checking Instagram, probably posting pictures of her breakfast, probably living the kind of life where Sunday morning means choosing between designer handbags instead of choosing between groceries and gasoline. Service begins with hymns that I know by heart, hymns that Robert used to hum while he worked in his shop, back when he had a shop, back when we believed hard work and faith would be enough to build something lasting, something that wouldn't get sold piece by piece to pay for someone else's dreams. And I sing along, but the words feel hollow, feel like promises I'm no longer sure I believe. Pastor Renee takes the pulpit and announces that today she wants to try something different, wants to invite the young people to join her for a special storytelling session about the parables of Jesus, and she looks directly at Chloe when she says it, looks at her with the kind of intentional gaze that means this isn't random, this isn't coincidence, this is providence dressed up as programming. Several young adults make their way to the front of the church, settling into the circle of chairs that Deacon Elijah has arranged, and Chloe joins them, looking pleased to be singled out, looking like she's been chosen for something special, which maybe she has, maybe this is God's way of speaking truth into stubborn hearts, maybe this is how grace works when people are too proud to ask for it directly. Pastor Renee begins with the parable of the hidden treasure, the story of a man who finds a pearl of great price and sells everything he has to buy the field where it's buried, and I listen with half my attention, while the other half watches. Chloe's face watches. The way she nods along like she understands, like she's grasping the meaning when really she's just performing, understanding the way she's been performing her whole life. But then Pastor Renee does something unexpected, something that makes my breath catch in my throat like a hook catching a fish. She puts down her Bible and says, "Now, I want to tell you a modern parable, a story about love and sacrifice that happened right here in our community." And Ruby's hand finds mine again, squeezes tight, like she's trying to anchor me to this moment, to this truth that's about to be spoken. There once was a seamstress, Pastor Renee begins, and her voice carries the authority of someone who's been chosen to speak difficult truths, someone who's been called to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And this seamstress had a daughter who was getting married and wanted a beautiful wedding, the kind of celebration that would make everyone remember her special day. The seamstress worked hard all her life, saved every penny, lived modestly so she could provide for her daughter's dreams. But when the time came for the wedding, the cost was more than she'd ever imagined. And she faced a choice between disappointing her child and disappointing herself. My heart pounds like a drum, like thunder, like the sound of secrets being dragged into daylight, and I want to leave, want to run, want to disappear before this story reaches its inevitable conclusion. But Ruby's hand keeps me anchored, keeps me present for whatever revelation is coming. So the seamstress began to sell her treasures, Pastor Renee continues, and her eyes find mine across the sanctuary. Find me sitting in my worn dress with my empty ring finger, with my guilty conscience. She sold her husband's tools, the ones he'd used to build their life together. She sold her car and walked everywhere she needed to go. She sold her wedding ring, the symbol of promises kept through decades of joy and sorrow. Chloe shifts in her chair and I can see her profile, see the slight frown. That means she's thinking, means she's trying to connect dots that haven't quite formed a picture yet. And Greg leans forward like he's trying to catch every word, like he senses there's more to the story than religious instruction. The seamstress gave everything she had to buy her daughter a perfect wedding, Pastor Renee says, and her voice drops to almost a whisper. And when the bride walked down the aisle in her beautiful dress, with her beautiful flowers in her beautiful venue, she never knew that every detail had been purchased with pieces of her mother's heart. Silence settles over the circle like snow, like a blanket, like the kind of quiet that comes after lightning strikes and before thunder rolls. And I can see understanding beginning to dawn in some faces, beginning to flicker like candles being lit in dark rooms. And Chloe's frown deepens like she's grasping for something just beyond her reach. Deacon Elijah, who's been sitting quietly in his chair, clears his throat and asks the question that hangs in the air like incense, like judgment, like grace. What do you think the lesson is here? What is this parable trying to teach us about love and sacrifice? A young man speaks up first, suggesting that it's about unconditional love, about the lengths parents will go to make their children happy, and several others nod in agreement, murmur about sacrifice and devotion and the beautiful selflessness of motherhood. And I feel sick listening to them. Turn my pain into poetry, turn my emptiness into inspiration. But Chloe doesn't speak, doesn't offer her interpretation, doesn't join the chorus of voices praising the seamstress for her sacrifice. And I wonder if she's beginning to recognize something familiar in this modern parable, beginning to see herself in the bride who never asked what her happiness cost, beginning to understand that fairy tales always exact a price from some. And Pastor Renee nods at the responses, but her expression suggests she's waiting for something more, waiting for someone to dig deeper, to find the uncomfortable truth beneath the comfortable interpretation. And when the conversation begins to lag, she speaks again. But what about the seamstress, she asks, and her voice carries a note of challenge, of disappointment, of prophetic anger. What happened to her dreams? What happened to her future? What happened to the woman beneath the mother? The question hangs in the air like smoke, like guilt, like the echo of words that can't be taken back. And I see several people shift uncomfortably, see them beginning to understand that this isn't just a story about beautiful sacrifice. This is a story about the cost of love. This is a story about what happens when giving everything leaves nothing behind. Chloe's face has gone pale, and she looks around the circle like she's searching for an exit, like she's beginning to realize this isn't just a parable, this is a mirror. And she doesn't like what she sees reflected there, doesn't like the possibility that she might be the bride who never asked the questions that matter, who never counted the cost of her joy. Sometimes, Pastor Renee says, and her voice is gentle, now gentle the way truth tellers get when they're about to deliver the blow that breaks everything. Open. Sometimes love requires us to receive sacrifices we never asked for. Sometimes love requires us to acknowledge gifts we never knew we were given. Sometimes love requires us to look at the seamstresses in our lives and ask what we owe them, what we owe ourselves. Storytelling session ends with a prayer, but I don't hear the words. Don't bow my head, don't close my eyes, because I'm watching Chloe, watching the way she sits frozen in her chair, like a woman who's just heard her own name called from the grave, like a woman who's beginning to suspect that everything she thought she knew about her perfect wedding, her perfect life, her perfect love might be built on foundations she never examined. When the service ends and people begin to file out, chatting about lunch plans and afternoon activities, Chloe doesn't immediately stand, doesn't immediately rush back to her expensive husband and her expensive life. Instead, she sits in that circle of chairs, looking lost, looking young, looking like the little girl who used to ask me endless questions about everything except the cost of unswercy. Make my way toward the exit, but as I pass the circle, I hear Deacon Elijah's voice, quiet and thoughtful, addressing Chloe directly. And what do you think? He asks her. What does this parable mean to you? And in the pause that follows, in the silence that stretches between question and answer, I hold my breath and hope for wisdom, hope for recognition, hope for the kind of truth that sets everyone free, even when freedom hurts, especially when freedom hurts. But Chloe just shakes her head and says, it's a nice story, I guess, but kind of sad. Don't you think the seamstress should have been happier about her daughter's wedding day? And the words hit me like stones, like the final proof that some people can stare directly at mirrors and never see themselves, can hear their own stories told as parables and never recognize the voice of their own hearts. He walk home alone because Ruby stayed to help clean up, stayed to do the work that keeps churches running, while I carry the weight of knowing that even when truth is spoken, some ears remain closed, some hearts remain hardened, some daughters remain blind to the price of love paid in full by mothers who've forgotten how to ask for anything in return. But Pastor Renee tried, and that means something, means someone besides Ruby and me knows the truth, means someone with authority and wisdom and the power to speak into closed hearts, has seen the ledger of my sacrifice and found it worthy of parable, worthy of Sunday morning instruction, worthy of being lifted up as an example of love that costs everything. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe planting seeds is all anyone can do. Maybe truth is like gardens, requiring patience and season, and the faith that what's buried in darkness will eventually push through soil toward light, toward air, toward the kind of revelation that changes everything, even when change feels impossible. Even when daughters refuse to see what mothers have always known, that love without sacrifice isn't love at all, it's just transaction dressed up in wedding white. Tuesday afternoon finds me in the kitchen mending Mrs. Peterson's Sunday dress for the third time this year, because the seams keep giving way under the weight of her grief eating since her husband passed, and she brings me $5 and a plate of cookies every time, apologizing for the extra work when really she's giving me the gift of purpose, the gift of being needed, the gift of remembering that my hands still know how to fix things even when my heart feels permanently broken. Doorbell rings, which surprises me because people in this neighborhood don't ring doorbells, they knock or call out or just walk in like Ruby does. And when I open the door, there's a young woman with a clipboard and a bright smile, wearing the kind of clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and she asks if I'm Martha Ellison in a voice that sounds like she's been practicing pronunciation, like my name is foreign territory she's learning to navigate. I say, though something in my chest tightens like a spring, like a warning, like the feeling you get when storm clouds gather on the horizon, and you know you should have brought in the laundry hours ago, should have secured the things that matter before the wind started howling. Game from Elegant Occasions Bridal, she says, and her smile gets brighter, impossibly brighter, like she's selling joy by the yard, like happiness comes with payment plans. We're following up on customer satisfaction for recent weddings, and I wondered if we could chat about your experience with us. Words hit me like cold water, like the realization that secrets have legs, have ways of walking themselves into daylight. And I grip the door frame because suddenly the world feels unstable, feels like it's tilting towards some truth I'm not ready to face, and she's still talking, still smiling, still holding that clipboard like it contains evidence of crimes I thought I'd buried deep enough alike to get feedback from all parties involved in the wedding planning process. She continues, and her voice is professional, cheerful, oblivious to the way my hands are shaking, to the way my breath is coming shallow, like I'm drowning in air. Your daughter Chloe mentioned you were very involved in the financial planning. Me mouth goes dry as dust as the summer Robert died when the rain stopped coming. And the garden wilted despite all my prayers, despite all my careful tending, despite all my belief that some things could survive on love alone. And I want to close the door, want to pretend I never heard those words, want to go back to the kitchen, where Mrs. Peterson's dress waits patient as pain for mending that might actually hold. What exactly did she say? I managed to ask, though my voice sounds far away, sounds like it's coming from underwater, from some deep place where truth lives with the fish and the drowned dreams and the things we thought we'd hidden forever. Oh, she was just showing off her wedding photos to Ms. Rodriguez, the shop owner, the young woman says, and her smile never wavers, never acknowledges that she's dropping bombs disguised as small talk, disguised as customer service, disguised as the kind of innocent conversation that destroys lives. She mentioned how grateful she was that her mother helped with the final payments, how sweet it was that you covered some of the last-minute expenses. The world narrows to a pinpoint, like looking through the wrong end of a telescope, like watching your life collapse into a single moment of recognition. And I realized that Chloe has been telling people I helped with her wedding, has been spreading a version of truth that makes her look grateful, makes her look blessed, makes her look like a daughter who appreciates her mouth, breaks through denial when love breaks through pride, when daughters finally see what mothers have always known. As I say, and I hold my breath, hold my hope, hold the possibility that this conversation might finally become honest, might finally become real, might finally acknowledge the elephant in the room, wearing my wedding dress and carrying my checkbook. Are you okay? She asks, and the question is so small, so inadequate, so completely insufficient to address the magnitude of what we're not talking about, that I almost laugh, almost cry, almost hang up the phone. Because how do you explain to someone that you sold your past to buy their future, that you're not okay and will never be okay, and that their happiness was purchased with pieces of your heart? I'm fine, I say again, because mothers always say they're fine even when they're drowning, especially when they're drowning, especially when the people who could save them are too busy celebrating their own lives to notice the water rising around the women who taught them how to swim well. Good, she says, and the relief in her voice is audible, is tangible, is proof that she doesn't want to dig deeper, doesn't want to uncover truths that would complicate her perfect narrative, doesn't want to acknowledge that fairy tales always cost someone something. After she hangs up, I sit in Robert's chair, surrounded by the silence he left behind, surrounded by the questions Chloe won't ask, surrounded by the truth that's walking around town in other people's mouths, while my own daughter chooses blindness, chooses ignorance, chooses the comfort of not knowing over the discomfort of understanding. Ms. Peterson's dress still waits on the kitchen table, still needs mending, still trusts that my hands know how to fix what's broken. But some things can't be mended with needle and thread, some tears go too deep, some damage is too fundamental, some relationships unravel in ways that no amount of skill can repair. And I sit in the growing darkness of Tuesday evening, knowing that secrets have their own timeline, their own momentum, their own way of demanding acknowledgement. And Chloe may be choosing not to see, but the truth doesn't care about choice, doesn't care about comfort, doesn't care about the pretty stories we tell ourselves about love that costs nothing when everything has a price, and some prices are paid in currencies that can never be repaid. Thursday morning, I walk to the grocery store because I need milk and bread and the kind of cheap pasta that fills stomachs without emptying wallets, and the walk takes 40 minutes each way because the closest store is on the other side of town in the strip mall, where Robert used to buy his work boots back when he had work, back when we had enough money for boots that lasted more than one season. When I return home carrying my small bag of necessities, Chloe's silver Lexus sits in my driveway, like an accusation, like a question mark, like evidence of the distance between her life and mine and my heart. Does something complicated, something that feels like joy and dread dancing together, feels like love and fear sharing the same small space, feels like hope wearing the mask of terror, find her in my kitchen, going through the drawers with the focused intensity of someone looking for something specific. And when she hears me come in, she straightens up like a child caught stealing cookies, her face flushed with guilt or embarrassment, or the particular discomfort that comes from invading someone else's privacy, even when that someone is your mother. Mom, she says, and her voice is too bright, too casual, too deliberately normal. And she gestures at the open drawers like she's been invited to search through my life, like this is perfectly reasonable behavior, like daughters always rifle through their mother's belongings when they can't make sense of stories that don't add. Upi was looking for a pen, she says, but we both know she wasn't looking for a pen. Know that pens live in the cup on the counter where they've lived for 20 years. Know that this excuse is tissue thin, is barely covering whatever truth drove her here on a Thursday morning when she should be at yoga class or lunch dates or whatever wealthy wives do with their abundant time. "What are you really looking for?" I ask, setting my groceries on the counter among the scattered contents of my junk drawer, the rubber bands and twist ties and expired coupons that make up the archaeology of a careful life, a life where nothing gets thrown away because you never know when you might need it, when every small thing might become essential. She looks at me for a long moment, and I see something in her eyes I haven't seen since she was 7 years old and broke Robert's favorite coffee mug and tried to hide the pieces under her bed, hoping we wouldn't notice, hoping the broken thing would somehow fix itself if she just ignored it long enough. "I need to ask you something," she says, and her voice is smaller now, uncertain in a way that makes her sound young. Makes her sound like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to believe her mother could protect her from anything, including the truth. Bit before I can answer, before I can prepare myself for whatever question she's finally ready to ask, Ruby's voice calls from the front door and footsteps announce her arrival in the kitchen, where she stops short at the sight of Chloe standing among my scattered belongings. Stops and takes in the scene with the sharp eyes of someone who's been waiting for this moment. "Well," Ruby says, and her voice carries 20 years of friendship and frustration and protective love. "Look what the cat dragged in." Chloe's face hardens at Ruby's tone, hardens like it used to when she was 16 and thought everyone was against her, thought the world was conspiring to keep her from getting what she deserved, and she crosses her arms in a gesture I remember from countless teenage arguments about curfews and chores and the difference between wants and needs. "Ruby," I say, trying to keep peace, trying to maintain the fiction that this is a normal family visit, trying to pretend my daughter isn't standing in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of her own willful blindness. But Ruby's not interested in peace, has never been interested in keeping comfortable lies comfortably. "You finally decided to ask some questions," Ruby says to Chloe, and there's no warmth in her voice, no welcome, no patience for pretty daughters who take 30 years to notice their mother's bleeding. "You finally ready to hear some answer?" Chloe's chin lifts in defiance, in the particular stubborn pride that's been her signature since childhood. But underneath the defiance I see something else, see uncertainty, see the dawning realization that she's walked into a conversation she's not prepared for. "I don't know what you're talking about," Chloe says, but her voice wavers like a candle in wind, like faith under pressure, like the kind of lie that sounds false even to the person telling it. Ruby laughs, but there's no humor in it, no joy, no lightness, just the bitter sound of someone who's watched her best friend sacrifice herself in silence, while ungrateful children live in willful ignorance. "Say you don't know," Ruby repeats, and she moves to the kitchen table, where she pulls out a chair and sits like she's settling in for a long overdue conversation, like she's prepared to stay here until truth gets spoken, whether anyone wants to hear it or not. "Let me help you understand," Ruby continues, and she opens her purse and pulls out a folded piece of paper and spreads it on the table, like evidence, like proof, like the smoking gun that's been waiting for its moment to fire. It's a photocopy of a pawn ticket, dated April 2nd, the same day I made the final payment on Chloe's wedding, the same day I sold the last pieces of my life with Robert to buy my daughter's happiness. And Chloe stares at it like she's reading a foreign language, like she's trying to decode symbols that don't make sense. "Wedding rings," Ruby explains, though her voice is gentle now, gentle like she's talking to someone who's been in an accident, someone who's in shock, someone who needs truth delivered in small doses so it doesn't cause more damage than it heals. "To bands, white gold with small diamonds, $750. Chloe's face goes white, goes blank, goes through the particular transformation that happens when reality crashes into fantasy, when comfortable lies get stripped away by uncomfortable truths, and she reaches for the chair, backs herself into it like she needs support, like her legs won't hold her anymore. "That's not possible," she whispers. But possibility doesn't matter when you're staring at proof, when you're holding evidence, when you're forced to confront the gap between what you believed and what actually happened. "Where did you get this?" Chloe asks, and her voice is barely audible, is coming from some deep place where shame lives, where recognition hurts, where daughters realize they've been living in houses built on their mother's bones. Ruby looks at me, and I see the question in her eyes, see her asking permission to continue, asking if I'm ready for the whole truth to come out, asking if I can handle watching my daughter's comfortable world collapse under the weight of what love costs, when it's real, when it's sacrificial, when it's the kind that empties everything. G nod. Because what else can I do? Because secrets have their own momentum, because truth has been knocking at our door for months, and now it's finally been invited in. "City, your mother asked me to hold onto some things," Ruby says, and her voice is matter of fact, as clinical as the voice of someone delivering news that needs to be heard. Even when hearing it hurts, she didn't want you to know, but she kept the receipts, kept the records, kept proof of everything. She gave up for your wedding, everything. Chloe repeats, and the word hangs in the air like smoke. Like guilt, like the echo of choices that can't be taken back. Ruby reaches into her purse again and pulls out more papers, more evidence, more proof of the systematic dismantling of a life, and spreads them on the table like a prosecutor making a case, like a teacher giving a lesson, like a friend finally saying what needs to be said. Robert's Workshop sold March 15, $22,000. Ruby reads from one paper, then the car March 22nd for $1,000. Then she picks up the pawn ticket again. Wedding rings April 2nd, $700 and -$1. Numbers fall between us like stones, like accusations, like the arithmetic of love that costs everything and adds up to the difference between fairy tales and real life. And Chloe stares at the papers like they might disappear if she looks hard enough, like they might reveal themselves to be mistakes or lies or cruel jest. $29,000, Ruby says, adding up the total, adding up the cost, adding up the price of one perfect day that emptied 28 years of careful saving, 28 years of building a life together, 28 years of believing there would be time for retirement, for travel, for the dreams that got sold to pay for someone else's happiness. That's what your fairy tale wedding cost your mother, Chloe. And Ruby's voice is fierce now, is angry now, is the voice of someone who's watched her best friend disappear piece by piece while everyone else looked the other way. That's what she paid, so you could dance at the Grand Plaza, so you could have white roses, so you could feel like a princess for one day. Chloe's hands shake as she picks up the papers, as she reads the dates, as she connects the timeline, as she realizes that every deposit, every payment, every piece of her perfect wedding was purchased with pieces of her mother's history, with fragments of her mother's future, with coins from her mother's empty pockets. Mom, Chloe says, and she turns to look at me. And her eyes are wide with something that might be understanding, might be horror, might be the beginning of comprehension. Why didn't you tell me? Because that's what mothers do, I say, and my voice sounds tired, sounds older than my years. Sounds like it's coming from the bottom of a well where all the sacrificed dreams go to die. We don't tell, we just give, and we hope, and we love, and we pay the price, and we smile, and we pretend it doesn't cost us everything but $29,000, Chloe whispers. Like she's just learning to count, like she's just discovering that numbers mean something beyond abstract concepts, like she's just realizing that money comes from somewhere, has to be earned, has to be saved, has to exist before it can be spent. That was everything, wasn't it? She asks, and now her voice breaks, now the tears start, now the reality of what she's been given finally breaks through the wall of willful ignorance that's protected her from feeling guilty or grateful or responsible. That was everything, Ruby confirms, and she gathers the papers like she's cleaning up evidence, like she's putting away proof of a crime that's finally been solved. Your mother sold her past to buy your future, and you never asked where the money came from, never wondered how a seamstress could afford Grand Plaza prices, never questioned the math that didn't add up. Chloe looks around my kitchen like she's seeing it for the first time, like she's finally noticing the empty spaces where things used to be, the missing microwave that broke 2 years ago, the bare walls where Robert's tools used to hang, the silence where the radio used to play because I sold it along with everything else that had resale value. I'm so sorry, she says. But sorry feels inadequate, feels too small, feels like trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. And we all know that some things can't be fixed with apologies, can't be healed with regret, can't be undone with tears. No matter how sincere they are. Ruby stands to leave, but before she goes she looks at Chloe one more time, looks at her with the expression of someone who's said what needed to be said, someone who's done the hard work of truth telling, someone who's planted seeds in soil that may or may not be ready to grow. She didn't want you to know, Ruby says, but knowing is the only way love can be real, knowing is the only way gratitude can be genuine, knowing is the only way families can heal from the wounds that secrets leave behind. And then Ruby's gone, and it's just Chloe and me in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of love that costs everything, surrounded by the proof that sacrifice is real, is measurable, is documented in dollars and cents and broken hearts and empty jewelry boxes. And we sit in the silence of truth, finally spoken truth, finally acknowledged truth, finally free to do whatever truth does when it's no longer caged by the need to protect feelings that were never as fragile as we pretended they were. Friday comes with gray skies and the kind of rain that doesn't know when to stop, and I spend the morning at the kitchen table with Mrs. Henderson. N's wedding dress from 1960 to that she wants altered for her granddaughter's ceremony next month, taking in the waist, letting out the bust, making adjustments that honor the past. while accommodating the present, and the work feels like meditation, feels like prayer, feels like the kind of healing that happens one stitch at a time. The phone rings at noon and it's Chloe's voice, soft and hesitant, like she's testing the waters, like she's not sure if I'll answer, if I'll talk to her, if I'll pretend. Yesterday never happened, but yesterday did happen, and truth once spoken can't be unspoken, can't be stuffed back into the dark corners where secrets live and fester and grow poisonous with time. Mom, she says, and the word carries weight, carries uncertainty, carries the sound of someone who's spent the night staring at ceilings, thinking about numbers and sacrifices and the cost of fairy tales that weren't supposed to cost anyone anything. As I say, because what else do you say when your daughter calls? After learning that her happiness was purchased with pieces of your heart, when she finally understands that love sometimes looks like empty jewelry boxes and sold cars, and the systematic dismantling of everything you thought would last forever. Cooled. We have lunch, she asks, and her voice is careful, is formal, is the voice of someone who's not sure what the rules are anymore, now that all the comfortable lies have been stripped away. Now that the truth sits between us like a chasm, like a bridge, like something that needs to be crossed carefully. Agree, because that's what mothers do. We show up, we answer the phone, we meet for lunch, we pretend that revelations don't change everything. Even when they change everything, especially when they change everything. And she suggests the diner on Main Street, the one with the vinyl booths and the coffee that tastes like it's been brewing since 1975, the one where working people eat. And prices haven't forgotten that some folks count pennies. See, walk there, because walking is what I do now, because cars belong to the past, along with wedding rings and workshops and all the other things that got traded for white roses and catered dinners. And the sound of my daughter laughing as she danced with her expensive husband in her expensive dress at her expensive reception that cost more than Robert and I spent on our entire first year of marriage. Clothes already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, looking smaller than she did yesterday, looking younger, looking like the little girl who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared her, when the world felt too big and uncertain and dangerous. And she stands when she sees me, approaches like she's walking on ice, like she's afraid one wrong step will send us both crashing through into waters too cold and deep for survival. Mom, she says again, and this time the word breaks like a dam, like a promise, like the sound hearts make when they finally understand the weight of what they've been given. And she wraps her arms around me in a hug that feels desperate, feels like someone trying to hold onto something that's already slipping away, feels like an apology that doesn't know how to apologize for something this big. We sit across from each other in the booth and order coffee and soup, because soup is cheap and filling, and because neither of us has much appetite for anything more substantial than broth and bread and the watery comfort of things that warm you from the inside without asking too much from your wallet or your wounded heart. Don't know how to do this, Chloe says, stirring sugar into her coffee with movements that are too careful, too precise, to focus, like she's trying to solve a problem that can't be solved with sweetener and cream. I don't know how to apologize for something I didn't know I was taking, but that's the thing about taking. Sometimes we take without knowing, sometimes we accept gifts without asking about the cost, sometimes we live in houses built on foundations we never examined, and the not knowing doesn't make the taking less real, doesn't make the gifts less expensive, doesn't make the foundations less likely to crumble when truth finally gets spoken. You don't have to apologize, I tell her, because that's what mothers say, even when apologies are exactly what we need, even when sorry is the only word that might begin to bridge the distance between love given and love received, even when forgiveness is the only thing that might heal wounds that go deeper than money, deeper than sacrifice, deeper than the arithmetic of hearts that empty themselves for other people's happiness. But I do, she says, and her voice is fierce now, is angry now, but the anger is directed inward, is focused on herself, is the particular rage that comes when you realize you've been living a lie, not because someone deceived you, but because you chose not to see, chose not to ask, chose not to acknowledge the obvious gaps between your assumptions and reality. Mocked your dress, she says, and the words ta like shame taste like the bitter recognition of cruelty that masquerades as humor, of jokes that cut deeper than intended, of moments when vanity reveals itself as the shallow, desperate thing it really is. I made fun of you for wearing the same thing to church when you were wearing it because you'd given everything else away. The memory sits between us like a physical presence, like a weight, like the ghost of Sunday morning humiliation, dressed up in cream-colored designer clothing. And I want to tell her it doesn't matter, want to minimize the pain, want to protect her from the full weight of what she did, but truth, once invited, doesn't leave quietly, doesn't tiptoe around feelings, doesn't soften edges that need to stay sharp. It Heard I say, and the admission feels like vulnerability, feels like weakness, feels like the kind of honesty that mothers aren't supposed to need because we're supposed to be strong. Supposed to be endlessly forgiving, supposed to absorb pain like sponges without ever wringing ourselves out. She says, and tears start falling, and she doesn't try to hide them, doesn't try to pretty them up, doesn't try to make crying look elegant. The way she's learned to make everything else in her life look perfect. I know, and I'm sorry, and I hate that sorry isn't enough, hate that I can't undo it, can't take it back. Can't fix what I broke. You sit in silence for a while, watching rain streak the diner windows. Watching other people eat their lunches and live their lives and deal with their own complicated relationships between love and money and sacrifice and the things we do to each other in the name of family, and I think about forgiveness. Think about what it means and what it costs, and whether some wounds heal or just learn to stop bleeding. $29,000, Chloe says finally, and the number hangs between us like a confession, like a prayer, like a weight that's too heavy for either of us to carry alone. That was your whole life, wasn't it? Everything you and Dad built together in it. Everything, I say, though we both know it was everything. Know that some lies are kinder than truth. Know that mothers will minimize their own pain right up until the moment they die, because that's what love looks like when it wears an apron and counts pennies and smiles through sacrifice. But it was everything, she insists, and her voice is stronger now, is more certain. Is the voice of someone who's done the math, who's looked at the receipts, who's finally willing to see what she spent 28 years refusing to acknowledge. Your security, your future, your memories of Dad, everything. Soup arrives, but neither of us touches it. Neither of us has the stomach for food when we're digesting truths that taste like copper and regret, and the particular flavor of love that costs more than anyone should have to pay, and we sit staring at bowls that will get cold while we try to figure out how to rebuild a relationship that was built on foundations neither of us understood. Should have asked, she says, and her voice is quiet, is thoughtful, is the voice of someone who's rewriting history in her head. Someone who's imagining a different version of events, where daughters pay attention, where children ask questions, where love doesn't require ignorance to function. But if you had asked, I say, what would I have told you? Because that's the question that haunts me. The question I can't answer, the question that keeps me awake at night, staring at ceilings and wondering if truth would have changed anything, or if it would have just made the sacrifice visible instead of invisible, made the pain shared instead of private. Would have stopped the wedding, she says immediately, like she doesn't need time to think about it, like the answer is obvious, like there was never any doubt about what the right choice would have been. I would have called it off, would have found another way, would have chosen different. Libet, would she have really? Would any daughter choose her mother's financial security over her own happiness? Would any bride cancel her fairy tale wedding because the money came from the wrong place, came at too high a cost, came with strings attached to other people's dreams? And I look at her sitting across from me in her expensive clothes with her expensive guilt, and I wonder if she really understands what she's saying. The truth is, I didn't want you to choose, I tell her, and this is the hardest truth of all, the one that makes me complicit in my own suffering, the one that reveals the particular pride that keeps mothers martyred. I wanted to give you the wedding of your dreams without you having to feel guilty about it, without you having to know what it cost, without you having to carry the weight of my sacrifice. But that's not fair, she says, and her voice is fierce again, is angry again, but this time the anger includes me. Includes the choice I made to suffer in silence, the choice I made to protect her from knowledge that might have changed everything. That's not love, that's just enabling, that's just teaching me that other people's happiness doesn't matter. Maybe she's right, maybe love that costs everything isn't love at all. Maybe it's something else, something desperate and hungry and ultimately destructive, dressed up in the vocabulary of virtue. Maybe mothers who empty themselves for their children's happiness are creating children who don't know how to value anything, including themselves. Don't know how to fix this, Chloe says, and her voice breaks again, breaks like something fundamental has shifted between us, like the foundation of our relationship has cracked, and we're both standing in the rubble trying to figure out what can be salvaged, what can be rebuilt, what can be saved from the wreckage of good intentions and terrible choice made. Fixing isn't the point, I say, because some things can't be fixed, can only be acknowledged, can only be grieved, can only be forgiven and learned from, and used as the foundation for something different, something more honest, something built on truth instead of comfortable. Least rain keeps falling outside the diner windows, and our soup gets cold, and the afternoon stretches ahead of us, uncertain as weather, as the future, as the possibility that love might look different when it's based on truth instead of sacrifice, when it's built on honesty instead of protection, when it requires both people to see clearly instead of one person choosing blindness. while the other chooses invisibility. Don't solve anything over lunch, don't fix what's broken, don't find easy answers to hard questions, but we sit together in the wreckage of our comfortable lives, and maybe that's enough for now. Maybe that's how healing begins, not with solutions but with presence, not with answers but with the willingness to sit in truth even when truth is uncomfortable, even when truth reveals how much damage love can do when it's the wrong kind of love. Applied in the wrong kind of way. When we leave the diner, Chloe hugs me again, and this time, the hug feels different, feels like the beginning of something instead of the end, feels like the start of a conversation that might take years to finish, might take the rest of our lives to complete, but at least it started. At least truth has been invited to the table, at least we're both finally willing to see what love looks like when it's real instead of perfect, when it's honest instead of comfortable. When it costs something from both people instead of everything. From 3 weeks pass like careful footsteps, like the measured progress of people learning to walk on new ground, and Chloe calls every other date, now calls with questions about recipes and memories and the things she never asked about when she thought she knew everything about being happy. And I find myself telling her stories about Robert, about the early years, about dreams we had that got deferred and then abandoned and then sold to pay for other people's happiness. Doesn't offer money, doesn't try to fix what can't be unfixed, doesn't attempt to repay debts that were never meant to be debts, but she listens and asks questions and slowly, carefully begins the work of knowing her mother as a person instead of just a function, as a woman who had dreams before she became a vessel for someone else's dreams. Pastor Renee calls on a Tuesday morning with sunshine streaming through my kitchen windows, and her voice carries the particular excitement of someone who's about to ask a favor, disguised as an opportunity, disguised as the kind of honor that feels more like work than recognition. Martha, she says the annual Grace Community Charity Gala is next Saturday, and we're looking for speakers, people who embody the spirit of giving, people who understand what it means to sacrifice for others. And I immediately know where this conversation is heading. Know that secrets once spoken have a way of becoming public knowledge, have a way of turning private pain into teaching. Moments seem not much of a public speaker, I tell her, because the thought of standing in front of the congregation talking about sacrifice makes my stomach clench like a fist. Like the feeling you get when you realize you're about to be made an example of, when your private suffering is about to become someone else's inspiration. But Pastor Renee is persistent, has the gentle bulldozer quality of someone who's convinced they know what's best for your soul. And she mentions that Chloe has already agreed to speak, has already committed to addressing the community about the importance of recognizing sacrifices we take for granted. And suddenly I understand that this isn't just about me speaking. This is about both of us standing together. This is about truth being told from both sides of the equation. Shlo wants to honor you, she says, and her voice is warm, is loving, is the voice of someone who's watched broken families try to heal, who's seen how hard it is to rebuild relationships on foundations of honesty instead of comfortable lies. She wants to tell your story, but she thinks it should come from you. My story feels too personal, too raw, too much like undressing in public. But Pastor Renee keeps talking, keeps painting pictures of community and healing, and the way truth shared can become truth that helps other people. And eventually, I find myself saying yes, find myself agreeing to stand in front of people who've known me for decades and tell them about the price of love, the cost of dreams, the arithmetic of hearts that empty themselves for other people's happiness. Saturday arrives with crisp autumn air and the kind of golden light that makes everything look like a painting, like a memory, like the kind of day when important things happen. And the church fellowship hall has been transformed with white tablecloths and centerpieces made from grocery store flowers that look elegant anyway, look beautiful in the way that simple things become beautiful when they're arranged with care and love. I wear my navy dress because it's still the only church dress I have, because some things don't change, just because truth gets spoken, because honesty doesn't automatically restore what was lost. And Ruby sits at my table with her hand on my arm, providing the kind of support that comes from 20 years of friendship, from someone who's seen you at your worst and loved you anyway. Pastor Renee introduces the evening, talks about community and giving and the ways we support each other through difficult times, and then she calls Chloe to the podium, and my daughter stands in front of the gathered congregation in a simple black dress that probably still cost more than my monthly grocery budget, but looks subdued, looks appropriate. Looks like she's finally learned the difference between being seen and being noticed. Such begins by talking about gratitude, about the way we sometimes take for granted the people who love us most. And I watch her face, see the nervousness, see the determination, see the young woman who's learning that growing Up sometimes means admitting you were wrong, means acknowledging debts you never knew you owed, means standing in front of your community and confessing that you've been blind. 3 months ago, she says, my mother attended my wedding and watched me dance in a dress that cost more than many people make in a month, and I was so focused on my perfect day that I never asked how that perfect day was possible, never questioned where the money came from, never wondered what my fairy tale cost. The people who loved meth room is quiet now, quiet in the way that congregations get when truth is being spoken, when someone is being vulnerable, when confession is happening in real time. And I see people leaning forward, see them recognizing something familiar in Chloe's words, see them thinking about their own families, their own sacrifices, their own willful blindness to the price other people pay for their happiness. My mother sold everything she owned to pay for my wedding, Chloe continues, and her voice gets stronger, gets more certain, gets the particular power that comes from speaking truth, that hurts, truth that costs something, truth that changes everything once it's been said. She sold my father's workshop, his tools, the car they shared for 12 years, even her wedding ring. And she never told me, never asked for recognition, never made me feel guilty for taking what I thought I deserved. People in the audience shift in their seats. And I see understanding dawning, see recognition, see the particular discomfort that comes when someone else's story illuminates your own, when someone else's confession makes you think about your own relationships, your own assumptions, your own failures, to see what's right in front of Yahweh. Mocked her dress at church 3 months ago, Chloe says, and now her voice breaks, now the tears start, now she's not performing confession, she's living it. I made fun of her clothes in front of other people because I was embarrassed by how she looked, because I wanted to distance myself from her modest life, because I'd forgotten that modest doesn't mean less than. Silence in the room is profound, is the kind of silence that comes when people are confronting their own sins, their own failures, their own ways of hurting the people who love them most. And I want to stand up, want to go to my daughter, want to tell her that confession doesn't have to be this public, this painful, this raw. But Pastor Renee catches my eye and nods, and I understand that this is what healing looks like. Sometimes this is how families rebuild themselves on foundations of truth instead of lies. This is how communities learn to see the seamstresses among them, learn to value the quiet sacrifices that make loud celebrations possible. Me mother gave me everything, Chloe says, and her voice is steady now, is clear now, is the voice of someone who's finally learned to see clearly. She gave me her past, her future, her security, her dreams, and she asked for nothing in return. And when I finally learned what my happiness had cost her, I realized that I'd never really learned how to love anyone. I'd only learned how to. Takesh talks about privilege, about blindness, about the way money can insulate you from understanding what things really cost. And I listened to my daughter speak truth about herself, speak truth about me, speak truth about love that gives everything and asks for nothing and gets taken for granted until someone brave enough to speak makes the invisible visible. Martha Ellison, Chloe says, looking directly at me sitting in my chair at my table wearing my one good dress that's seen better years, is the most generous person I know, and I spent 30 years taking her generosity for granted, spent 30 years assuming that other people's sacrifices were my birthright, spent 30 years confusing being loved with being entitled. She calls me to the podium, then invites me to stand beside her, invites me to add my voice to hers, and I make my way to the front of the room, on shaking legs with a racing heart, with the particular terror that comes from being asked to speak truth in public when you've spent your whole life keeping truth private. But when I reach Chloe, she takes my hand and I feel her strength, her love, her determination to make this right. And I look out at the faces in the audience, see Ruby crying, see Pastor Renee smiling, see Deacon Elijah nodding with approval, and I realize that this isn't about humiliation, this is about liberation. Don't have much to say, I begin, because public speaking has never been my gift, because words have always felt inadequate for describing the shape of love, the weight of sacrifice, the price of dreams that get sold to buy other people's happiness. But I want you to know that I don't regret what I gave my daughter. I continue, and this is true even though the truth is complicated, even though regret and love can exist in the same heart at the same time. I regret that she never knew what it cost, but I don't regret the cost itself, because love that gives everything is still love, even when it's the wrong kind of love, even when it teaches the wrong lessons. The audience listens, and I see understanding in their faces, see recognition, see the particular pain that comes when you realize how much damage good intentions can do, when you understand that protection can become enabling, that silence can become complicity, that love without boundaries can become love that harms. He sold those things because I wanted my daughter to be happy, I say, and my voice gets stronger, Gets more certain, gets the power that comes from finally speaking truth that's been trapped in silence for too long, but I never taught her that happiness has a cost. Never showed her that joy requires sacrifice from everyone, not just mothers. Never helped her understand that love is supposed to be mutual. The room is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet now, not the silence of people being uncomfortable, but the silence of people thinking, people processing, people beginning to understand that healing requires truth from both sides, requires acknowledgement from both giver and receiver, requires love that costs something from everyone involved. When I finish speaking, the applause starts. Slowly builds, gradually becomes the kind of sustained appreciation that comes not just from politeness, but from recognition, from gratitude, from the understanding that someone has spoken truth that needed to be heard, has broken silence that needed to be broken, has made visible sacrifices that deserved to be seen. Shlo hugs me on the podium, and this time, the hug feels like forgiveness, feels like the beginning of something new, feels like the foundation for a different kind of relationship. Built on truth instead of comfortable lies, built on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice, built on love that costs something from both people instead of everything from one. Later, as people gather around our table to talk about their own families, their own sacrifices, their own ways of learning to see clearly, I watch Chloe answering questions, fielding comments, accepting both praise and gentle criticism with the grace of someone who's finally learned that growing up means being wrong. Sometimes means hurting people you love, means doing the hard work of making things right. And I think about healing, think about how it happens, not all at once, but slowly, carefully, one conversation at a time, one truth at a time, one acknowledgement at a time. And maybe this is what redemption looks like, not the erasure of past mistakes, but the willingness to speak them aloud, the courage to build something better on the ruins of what came before, the faith that love can survive truth, that love can even be strengthened by truth when truth is spoken with courage and received with humility. Evening ends with Pastor Renee announcing that the community wants to do something to honor the sacrifices that often go unnoticed, wants to create something lasting, something that will help other people understand the true cost of love. And as people file out in T's memory while building something new, something mine, something that grows from loss instead of being diminished by its location, would be the old church annex. He continues, the building that's been sitting empty for 5 years, the one that needs renovation, but has good bones, has the kind of solid foundation that can support dreams, that can hold the weight of hope, that can become something beautiful with the right vision, the right leadership, the right person to make it come. Alavi Deacon Elijah has already talked to the church board, Greg says, and he pulls out another document, this one with signatures and official seals, and the kind of legal language that makes promises binding, makes dreams accountable, makes possibilities into realities. They're willing to lease the space for $1 a year as long as the program serves the community, as long as it provides real skills, real opportunities, real value. I think about Robert, about the workshop he lost when the factory closed, about the tools he sold one by one as work became scarce, about the dreams he deferred and then abandoned, about the retirement we planned that never came, about the legacy he wanted to leave. And I wonder if this is how healing works, not by erasing the past, but by building something new on the foundation of what was lost. But there's more, Greg says, and he pulls out another set of papers, these covered with Chloe's handwriting, with budgets and timelines and the kind of detailed planning that suggests someone has been thinking about this for weeks, has been researching and calculating and dreaming about ways to turn guilt into purpose, regret into restoration, shame into servitude. Chloe wants to fund a scholarship program, he explains, for young women who want to learn fashion design, who want to start their own businesses, who want to create beauty but don't have the resources, the connections, the advantages that money can buy. She wants to use her privilege to create opportunities instead of just consuming them. Martha and Robert Ellison Fashion Scholarship Fund. He reads from Chloe's notes, and hearing our names linked like that, hearing our marriage honored in the name of something that will help other people, makes my throat tight, makes my eyes water, makes something inside my chest unlock like a door that's been closed for 3 years finally opening to let light in. $5,000 annually. Greg continues, enough to cover tuition, materials, equipment, even a small stipend for living expenses, enough to make a real difference in someone's life, enough to transform dreams into possibilities, enough to prove that love doesn't always have to cost everything. Sometimes it can give everything. G sit at my kitchen table surrounded by blueprints and budgets and the architecture of redemption, and I think about Chloe, about the little girl who used to watch me so, about the teenager who thought my hobby was embarrassing, about the young woman who distanced herself from her mother's modest life, about the bride who never asked where her fairy tale came from, but also about the daughter who stood in front of our church and confessed her blindness, who acknowledged her debt, who chose vulnerability over vanity, who decided that growing up meant taking responsibility for the ways she'd hurt people who loved her. You don't have to decide today, Greg says, but I can see in his eyes that he hopes I'll say yes, hopes I'll take this chance, hopes I'll let them transform their guilt into something productive, their shame into something healing, their regret into something that serves others instead of just serving their own need. To feel better about themselves, but I'm already thinking about lesson plans, about the women who might come, about the skills they might learn, about the businesses they might start, about the beauty they might create, and I realize that this isn't about them needing to fix what they broke. This is about all of us needing to build something better than what existed before us, I say, and the word feels like a door opening, feels like a future beginning, feels like the possibility that some endings are really beginnings, that some losses are really foundations, that some sacrifices are really investments in things that haven't been imagined yet. Greg smiles and pulls out his phone to call Chloe, and I listen to him tell her that her mother said yes, tell her that the project can move forward, tell her that sometimes the best apologies aren't words but actions, aren't promises but commitments, aren't gifts but partnerships. When he hangs up, he looks at me with something that might be respect, might be admiration, might be the recognition that passes between people who understand that real change requires real work, requires sustained effort, requires the kind of commitment that lasts longer than guilt, longer than regret, longer than the temporary discomfort of being wrong. Shlo wants to come help with the renovation. He says she wants to learn to use tools, wants to understand what goes into her. Tea can only be passed from one generation to the next, but it's the smaller classroom that makes my heart race, the space with 6 workstations, where beginning sewers will learn basic skills, where young women will discover they can support themselves with their creativity, where mothers can bring their children while they learn trades that don't require college degrees, don't require connections, don't require anything except willingness to work and learn and create. A day is Sunday, and tomorrow the Martha and Robert Ellison Community Sewing Center officially opens with its first-class intermediate alterations for women who already know basics but want to expand their skills, want to increase their earning potential, want to transform their hobby into their livelihood. And I have 12 students registered, 12 women who paid modest fees that cover supplies and instruction and the dignity of learning something valuable instead of receiving something free. Pastor Renee insisted that we have a blessing ceremony this morning before the regular service, insisted that the congregation gather in the center to officially dedicate the space, to officially recognize the transformation that's taken place not just in the building, but in the people who made it possible. And as I walk through rooms that smell like fresh paint and new beginnings, I think about Robert, about how proud he would be, about how amazed he would be that his tools getting sold became the seed money for something this beautiful, this permanent, this useful. Chloe arrives early wearing a navy dress that looks exactly like mine, except newer, except tailored to fit her perfectly, except made from fabric that costs more per yard than I spend on groceries in a week, but the style is identical down to the 3/4 sleeves and modest neckline. And when I see her, my throat tightens because I understand what she's trying to say, understand that sometimes apologies come disguised as fashion choices. Look beautiful, I tell her, and she smiles with something that might be pride, might be peace, might be the particular satisfaction that comes from making choices that honor people instead of impressing them, choices that connect rather than separate, choices that say I see you, I value you, I want to stand beside you instead of above you. She's carrying a garment bag, and when she unzips it, I see fabric that takes my breath away. See silk the color of cream with hand-embroidered flowers, see the kind of workmanship that takes months to complete, see beauty that could only come from someone who understands that some things are worth taking time to create. Proper lights for you, she says, and her voice is soft, as uncertain as the voice of someone offering a gift that might be rejected, might be misunderstood, might be seen as too much or too little, or the wrong kind of gesture entirely. I made it myself. Dress is stunning, is the kind of garment that belongs in museums, belongs on red carpets, belongs in the closets of women who attend charity galas and fundraisers, and the kind of events where appearance matters more than substance. But when I hold it up to myself in the mirror, I see something else, see the hours Chloe spent learning to sew, see the mistakes she made and fixed, see the love stitched into every seam, every dart, every carefully placed boutonniere. Can't accept this, I say, because accepting gifts from children who've already given too much feels wrong, feels like enabling, Feels like continuing patterns that need to be broken, but Chloe shakes her head with the firmness of someone who's thought this through, who's prepared for resistance, who's ready to argue for the right to give instead of just receive. It's not charity, she says, and her voice carries echoes of Greg's words, carries the understanding that dignity matters more than money, that respect matters more than rescue, that some gifts only work when they're offered as expressions of love instead of obligations. Born from guilt, it's partnership. She explains that she wants to start a line of custom garments, wants to use the center as her base of operations, wants to employ the women who complete the advanced programs, wants to create a business that serves the community while serving her own need to do something meaningful with her life, something that honors the skills her mother taught her, the values her father modeled, the legacy her parents built together. Yubi arrives with Pastor Renee and Deacon Elijah and a small crowd of church members who've come to witness the official opening, to participate in the blessing, to see what community investment looks like when it's done right, when it serves people instead of just serving the consciences of people who want to feel better about having more than they need. Pastor Renee speaks about transformation, about the way broken things can become beautiful things, about the way endings can become beginnings, about the way individual sacrifice can become community blessing. And as she talks, I think about the navy dress hanging in my bedroom, think about how it witnessed humiliation and redemption, think about how some symbols change meaning depending on who's looking and what they've learned to see. When she invites me to speak, I stand in the center of the main workspace, surrounded by machines that will help women support their families, surrounded by tools that will teach skills that last lifetimes, surrounded by the physical manifestation of dreams that survived sacrifice, that grew from loss, that transformed grief into purpose. 6 months ago I begin, and my voice is steady, as clear, is the voice of someone who's learned the difference between being heard and being seen, between being appreciated and being understood, between being loved and being enabled. I sold everything I owned to buy my daughter a wedding dress. The words hang in the air like confession, like testimony, like the truth that sets everyone free. Even when freedom hurts, especially when freedom hurts, and I see understanding in the faces around me, see recognition, see the particular pain that comes when you realize how much damage good intentions can do, when love becomes martyrdom, when sacrifice becomes enabling. But today, I continue. I'm not here to talk about what I lost, I'm here to talk about what we built, what we learned, what we created together on the foundation of everything that was broken, everything that was healed, everything that was forgiven, in the slow, patient work of learning to love each other. But Terry, talk about partnership, about community, about the way individual skills become collective strength, become opportunities for people who might not otherwise have chances to learn, to earn, to create beauty with their hands. And as I speak, I watch Chloe's face, see pride, see love, see the particular satisfaction that comes from building something together, instead of just being grateful for something received. When the blessing ceremony ends and people begin to filter back toward the main church for regular service, Chloe helps me into the cream-colored dress, and when I look in the mirror I see a woman who looks familiar but different, see someone who's learned that dignity doesn't require designer labels, that beauty doesn't require expensive fabric, that love doesn't require sacrifice, that empties one person to fill another. The dress fits perfectly, hugs curves, that have learned to stand straight again, that have remembered how to occupy space with confidence, how to move through the world with purpose, how to carry themselves like someone who has work to do, people to serve, dreams to build, instead of just memories to mourn. Way walk into the sanctuary together, mother and daughter wearing matching dresses that tell the story of where we've been and where we're going. And when people turn to look, I see something different in their eyes, see respect, see recognition, see the understanding that some stories have happy endings, not because the pain goes away, but because the pain gets transformed into something useful, something beautiful, something that serves others instead of just serving. Sarah, Pastor Renee's sermon is about new wine requiring new wineskins, about the way old containers can't hold new possibilities, about the necessity of transformation when growth requires more space, more flexibility, more room for dreams that exceed the boundaries of what existed before. And I listen and think about Robert, think about how proud he would be, think about how amazed he would be that his wife found a way to honor his memory while building something entirely new. After church, people gather around us to ask questions about the center, about the classes, about the scholarships, about ways they can support what we're building, and I answer with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's doing, who has work that matters, who has found a way to transform personal loss into community gain. Deacon Elijah pulls me aside and tells He's watched many people try to turn their pain into purpose, but few succeed because they focus on the pain instead of the purpose, focus on what they lost instead of what they can build. Focus on healing themselves instead of serving others. He says, and his voice carries the authority of someone who's lived long enough to recognize wisdom when he sees it. You understood that healing happens through service. That redemption happens through work, that love becomes real when it creates opportunities for other people instead of just demanding appreciation from the moss. The afternoon wears on and plans get made on, schedules get confirmed. I feel something settle in my chest. Something that feels like peace, like purpose, like the particular satisfaction that comes from knowing your life has meaning beyond your own happiness, beyond your own comfort, beyond your own need to be loved and appreciated and seen. Tomorrow 12 women will sit at the workstations Chloe and I prepared. Will learn skills that can support their families, will discover that their hands can create beauty, can generate income, can transform their dreams into reality, and watching them learn will be better than any thank you, any apology, any recognition I could ever receive. Cream-colored dress moves with me as I walk through rooms that smell like fresh paint and new beginnings, moves like second skin, like confidence, like the physical manifestation of a woman who's learned the difference between being sacrificed for and being partnered with, between being appreciated and being empowered, between being loved and being enabled to love in return. And as Sunday afternoon fades into evening, as people say goodbye and make promises to return tomorrow to see what we've built, to participate in what we're creating, I stand in the center of the main workspace wearing a dress my daughter made with her own hands, surrounded by machines that will serve our community, surrounded by the physical proof that some endings really are beginnings, that some losses really are investments, that some sacrifices really do grow into something beautiful when they're tended by people who understand that love works best when it lifts everyone instead of emptying someone. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning that arrives with spring sunshine and the kind of warmth that promises new beginnings, I stand at the front of the beginner's classroom, watching 12 women bent over their workstations, learning to thread needles, learning to measure twice and cut once, learning that creating something beautiful with your hands requires patience and practice, and the willingness to make mistakes that become lessons, that become skills, that become livelihoods. Maria Gonzalez in the front row is working on a simple aligned skirt for her daughter's graduation ceremony, and her hands shake slightly as she guides fabric through the machine, but her face glows with the particular satisfaction that comes from making something that matters, making something that will be worn with pride, making something that transforms, a celebration from affordable to memorable. Beside her sits teenage Jasmine, whose mother works 2 jobs and still struggles to pay rent, but who dreams of designing clothes that make people feel beautiful, and who's learning that dreams don't require trust funds, don't require connections, don't require anything except willingness to work and learn and believe that your hands can create what your heart imagines. In the back corner, elderly Mrs. Chen measures and pins a pattern for a traditional Chinese dress she wants to make for her granddaughter's wedding, and watching her work reminds me that skill has no expiration date, that creativity doesn't diminish with age, that some gifts only get better when they're shared, passed down, wrapped in stories that connect generations through thread and fabric, and the ancient art of making beautiful things that last. Jasmine raises her hand with a question, and when I move to help her, I notice she's wearing the navy dress, the one that witnessed my humiliation and redemption, the one I finally donated to the center's clothing exchange, the one that found its way to someone who needed church clothes, who needed something modest and well-made, who needed dignity more than fashion. Seeing my old dress on Jasmine's teenage frame makes my throat tight, makes my eyes water, makes something deep in my chest unlock, because this is how healing works. Not through forgetting but through transformation, not through hiding but through sharing, not through keeping pain private but through letting it become something that serves others. Did you keep this dress for so long? Jasmine asks during the break, when students gather around the coffee pot that Ruby keeps filled with industrial strength brew that fuels creativity and conversation and dreams that require caffeine to sustain themselves. Through long hours of detailed work, the question hangs in the air like incense, like prayer, like the kind of honest curiosity that comes from young people who haven't yet learned that some stories are too painful to tell, who haven't yet discovered that adults sometimes keep secrets to protect themselves. Instead of protecting a thirsty, kept it, Jasmine, because it gave more than anyone ever saw, I say, and the words feel true, feel complete, feel like the kind of wisdom that only comes from living through loss and finding meaning on the other side of grief. She nods like she understands, though at 16. She can't possibly understand what it means to sacrifice everything for someone else's happiness, can't possibly know what it costs to love someone more than you love yourself. Can't possibly comprehend the particular pain of being taken for granted by the people who matter most, but maybe that's okay. Maybe understanding comes later. Maybe wisdom is like sewing, something you learn stitch by stitch, pattern by pattern, mistake by mistake, until suddenly you realize your hands know what to do without your mind having to think about it. Afternoon advanced class brings different challenges. Different dreams, different women who've already mastered basics and are ready to learn techniques that can transform hobby into business, that can turn creativity into independence, that can make dreams pay rent and buy groceries and provide the kind of security that comes from knowing your skills are valuable, are needed, are worth paying for. Arrives at 3 to teach pattern drafting to 5 women who want to design their own garments, who want to create clothes that fit real bodies instead of model bodies, who want to understand that beauty comes in all sizes and shapes and ages, and the confidence to create what you need instead of settling for what stores think you deserve. Watching my daughter teach these women reminds me that redemption is real, that people can change, that growth is possible, even when it seems impossible, even when patterns seem set, even when relationships seem broken beyond repair. And Chloe has become someone I'm proud of, someone who uses her privilege to create opportunities, someone who understands that leadership means service, means lifting others instead of just lifting yourself. Or pokes her head into the classroom to announce that we have visitors, that Pastor Renee has brought a group of women from the Presbyterian Church across town who want to see what we've built, who want to learn how to start similar programs in their community, who want to understand how individual healing can become community transformation. Visitors walk through our spaces with the wide eyes of people seeing possibility, seeing potential, seeing what happens when good intentions get translated into practical action, into sustainable programs, into work that serves people instead of just serving the conscience of people who want to feel better about having more than they need. Own woman asks about funding, about startup costs, about the difference between charity and empowerment, and I find myself explaining that the best help comes disguised as opportunity, comes dressed as respect, comes wrapped in the understanding that people don't need rescue, they need chances to rescue themselves. Anather asks about my navy dress, about the story behind the center, about the personal journey that led to this public service, and I tell her about sacrifice and revelation, about confession and forgiveness, about the long, slow work of learning to love each other better, and she nods with the recognition of someone who's done her own long, slow work, who's learned her own hard lessons about the difference between giving everything and giving wise lies. The visitors leave with business cards and contact information and promises to stay in touch. Pastor Renee lingers to tell me that the Presbyterian women weren't the only ones interested, that churches throughout the state have been asking about our model, about our methods, about our success in turning individual pain into community gain. She mentions a magazine article that's being written about the center, about women who've found economic independence through skills training, about the difference between programs that enable dependency and programs that enable independence, and I feel something flutter in my chest, something that might be pride, might be satisfaction, might be the particular joy that comes from knowing your life has meaning beyond your own happiness. Near closing time, when the last student has packed up her supplies and turned off her machine and promised to practice at home, Jasmine approaches my desk with something in her hands, something wrapped in tissue paper, something that looks like a gift, though it's nobody's birthday, nobody's anniversary, nobody's special occasion, except Tuesday. She unwraps a small fabric square with hand-embroidered flowers and careful stitching, and the kind of attention to detail that comes from someone who's learned that some things are worth taking time to do properly, worth investing patience in, worth creating with love instead of Speedy made this for you, she says, and her voice is shy, is uncertain, is the voice of someone offering something precious, something personal, something that came from her heart through her hands into the world. As beauty, as gratitude, as the kind of gift that can't be bought, can only be made. It's beautiful, I tell her, and it is beautiful, but more than that, it's meaningful, represents hours of practice, represents skills learned, represents the confidence that comes from knowing your hands can create what your heart imagines, can transform dreams into reality, can make something that matters. She tells me it's a reminder that the dress I gave her didn't just give her something to wear, but gave her inspiration, gave her the understanding that clothes can carry stories, can represent dignity, can transform how people see themselves and how the world sees them. As she leaves wearing my old navy dress with her embroidered gift accepted and treasured, I think about cycles, about how things End and begin about how loss becomes investment, becomes opportunity, becomes legacy, and I realize that this is what Robert would have wanted. This is how he would have chosen to be remembered, not through grief, but through service, not through what was lost, but through what was built on the foundation of what was lost. Shlomo appears in the doorway of my office holding an envelope that looks official, looks important, looks like the kind of correspondence that changes things, that announces opportunities, that opens doors to possibilities we haven't imagined. Yet it's from the community college, she says, and her voice carries excitement, carries hope, carries the particular energy of someone who's discovered that good news is even better when it's shared. The fashion design program wants to partner with US, wants to offer certification through our advanced classes, wants to make our training officially recognized. She explains that students who complete our programs would receive college credit, would have credentials that employers recognize, would have diplomas that open doors to careers that require more than just skill, require official acknowledgement, require the kind of legitimacy that transforms hobbies into professions. But there's more, she says, and she pulls out another document, this one with letterhead from the State Economic Development Office, this one offering grants for programs that successfully move people from unemployment to self-employment, from dependency to independence, from dreams to real. You look at these documents, at these opportunities, at these possibilities that seemed impossible 6 months ago when I was sitting in my kitchen with a ledger full of losses and a heart full of regret, and I think about Robert, about how proud he would be, about how amazed he would be that his tools getting sold became the seed money for something this successful, this sustainable, this meaningful. As we lock up the center and walk toward our cars, I notice Chloe's hands, notice calluses from construction work, from sewing work, from the honest labor of building something meaningful, and I realize that these hands that once only knew how to spend money now know how to create value, know how to serve others, know how to build beauty that lasts. Mom, she says as we reach our cars, and something in her voice makes me turn, makes me pay attention, makes me prepare for one of those moments when daughters become women, when children become adults, when relationships shift into new configurations that honor both past and future. Greg and I are expecting, she says, and her voice is soft, is wondering, is full of the particular joy that comes from new life, from new possibilities, from the understanding that some stories continue beyond their expected ending. News hits me like sunshine, like grace, like the kind of blessing you don't dare hope for but receive anyway, and I think about grandchildren, about legacy, about the kind of inheritance that can't be measured in dollars and cents but can be measured in love and skills, and the understanding that beauty is created by hands that care about more than themselves. Want to name the baby Robert, she says, if it's a boy, and her voice breaks with emotion, with gratitude, with the understanding that some names carry more than identity, carry history, carry the promise that good people are remembered through the lives they touch, through the love they give, through the dreams they plant in other people's hearts. He hugged my daughter in the parking lot of the center we built together, surrounded by the sound of machines winding down, surrounded by the satisfaction of work completed, surrounded by the promise of tomorrow's classes, tomorrow's students, tomorrow as opportunities to transform dreams into real. At the end, as I drive home wearing the cream-colored dress Chloe made with her own hands, thinking about grandchildren who will learn to sew, thinking about students who will support their families, thinking about the navy dress that gave everything and received everything in return, I understand that this is how love works, when it's healthy, when it's mutual, when it costs something from everyone involved, instead of everything from one person. Evening light slants through my kitchen windows where Robert's chair still sits, where Chloe's high school pictures still line the mantel, where the truth finally spoke itself aloud and changed everything. And I sit at the table where the ledger once recorded loss and sacrifice and now holds business plans and class schedules, and the mathematics of hope multiplied by possibility divided by hard work, and resulting in something that serves others instead of just serving sorrow. Tomorrow, 24 women will sit at workstations learning skills that will support their families, learning that their hands can create beauty, can generate income, can transform their dreams into reality, and watching them learn will be better than any recognition, any appreciation, any thank you I could ever receive. Because this is what love looks like when it's real, when it's sustainable, when it ifs everyone instead of emptying someone, when it creates instead of just consuming, when it builds legacy instead of just demanding gratitude. If dress hangs in my closet now, the navy one that witnessed humiliation and redemption, that carried sacrifice and hope, that gave everything and received everything, that transformed from symbol of loss to symbol of possibility. And sometimes I take it out and hold it and remember that some things have to be broken before they can be healed, have To be emptied before they can be filled, have to be given away before they can multiply into blessings that serve others long after the original giver has been forgotten. But I haven't been forgotten. The center bears my name and Robert's name and will serve this community for decades, will teach skills that last lifetimes, will create opportunities that transform dreams into reality, and that is legacy, that is love. That is the kind of inheritance that multiplies instead of diminishing, that serves instead of just satisfying, that builds instead of just remembering. And in the growing darkness of Tuesday evening, surrounded by the sounds of a neighborhood settling into sleep, surrounded by the promise of tomorrow's work, surrounded by the particular peace that comes from knowing your life has meaning beyond your own happiness, I feel grateful, feel complete, feel ready for whatever comes next. Because I've learned that endings are really beginnings, that losses are really investments. That love that gives everything sometimes receives everything in return, but in ways we never expected, in forms we never imagined, through people we never knew. We're watching, learning, growing, becoming more beautiful because of what we were willing to sacrifice and then transform into something that serves the world instead of just serving our own need to be needed, to be appreciated, to be seen.